Stepmom forced her to marry a billionaire CEO, but after one night, he became obsessed with her. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Let us return to our main character. The rain drummed softly against the chapel windows, a steady rhythm beneath the hollow sound of the organ. Rows of empty pews stretched behind her, the scent of lilies sharp in the air. Elena stood before the altar in a white dress that was not her own. It hung loosely on her shoulders, borrowed from a cousin who had never come to claim it back. Her hands trembled around the bouquet, petals quivering like her breath. At the far end of the aisle, Adrian Blackwood waited. The billionaire CEO, tall and poised in a black suit, looked every bit like a man carved from marble. His jaw was firm, his eyes unreadable, his hands folded neatly behind his back. He did not smile. He did not even look at her. To him, this ceremony was nothing but a transaction signed in the ink of obligation. The priest cleared his throat, his voice echoing slightly against the stone walls. "We are gathered here today." But Elena barely heard the words. Her mind drifted back to the moment 2 weeks ago when her stepmother, Veronica, had walked into her room holding a folder sealed with a golden emblem. "You will marry him," she had said with a calm, cruel certainty. "It is the only way to save your father's workshop from bankruptcy. You should thank me for giving you such a chance." Elena had begged, cried, and even fallen to her knees, but Veronica's eyes never softened. The next morning, reporters were already whispering that the Blackwood fortune was about to merge with the Montero estate. There was no turning back. Now, as she stood before Adrian, every light in the chapel felt cold. When the priest asked, "Do you take this man to be your husband?" her voice barely rose above a whisper. "I do." Adrian's reply came a beat too late. "I do," he said flatly, as though reciting a contract clause. The ceremony ended without applause, without music. Outside, a black limousine waited. Cameras flashed from the distance, catching every forced smile. Inside the car, silence hung thick between them. Adrian finally spoke, his tone low but clear. "This marriage means nothing outside of paper. Do not expect love. Do not expect warmth." Elena turned her face toward the window, watching raindrops race each other down the glass. Her reflection looked like that of a stranger. Somewhere deep inside, she promised herself one thing, that even in this loveless marriage, she would never let them see her break. The limousine disappeared into the storm, carrying 2 strangers bound by a contract and 1,000 unspoken wounds. And that was the night the story of Elena Blackwood truly began. The storm had not stopped the next morning. Gray clouds still hung low over the city skyline as the limousine turned into the long driveway of the Blackwood estate. The iron gates opened slowly, revealing a mansion that looked more like a museum than a home. Columns of white marble rose toward the sky, and the sound of rain tapping against the car roof echoed like a soft warning. Elena sat beside Adrian in silence. The hem of her wedding dress brushed against the leather seat. She had not slept. The scent of lilies still clung to her skin, and the weight of his final words in the car the night before pressed heavy on her chest. "This marriage exists only on paper." The words repeated in her mind with every turn of the tires. When the car stopped, the butler opened the door. "Welcome home, Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood." Elena stepped out first, clutching the small purse she had brought from her father's house. Inside, it was a single photograph of her and her late father at the old wood workshop, the last place that had ever felt safe. She looked up at the mansion. The tall glass windows reflected her faint figure, pale and uncertain. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and polish. The grand staircase curved upward like something from an old movie, lined with portraits of the Blackwood family. Every painting seemed to watch her. Adrian handed his coat to the butler and spoke without looking at her. "You will stay in the east wing. Someone will show you the room. Breakfast is at 7. You are not required to join." His voice was calm, professional, distant, like a CEO delivering instructions at a board meeting. Elena nodded quietly. She wanted to ask where her belongings would go, or whether she was allowed to walk outside, but her throat refused to form words. The butler gestured for her to follow. "This way, Mrs. Blackwood." The corridor stretched endlessly, every step muffled by thick carpet. The walls were decorated with golden sconces that flickered gently, casting light across old photographs. One of them caught her attention, a picture of Adrian as a teenager, standing beside a man who looked proud yet strict. The father, she assumed. When they reached her room, the butler opened the door. "If you need anything, press the button by the bed. Dinner is served at 8. He bowed and left, the door closing with a soft click. The suite was beautiful. Too beautiful. The bed had crisp white linens, and the balcony overlooked the gray city below. Yet everything felt untouched, sterile, like a display piece. On the table by the window, a folder waited. Her name was printed neatly on the cover. She opened it slowly, her fingers trembling as she turned the first page. It was the marriage contract, 5 pages long, thick with clauses and signatures. Each paragraph seemed colder than the last. Clause 1. No interference in the business or private matters of Mr. Adrian Blackwood. Clause 2. No public statements or media appearances without prior approval. Clause 3. Residence at the Blackwood estate is mandatory for 3 months. Clause 4. Any breach of the above terms will void the financial settlement arranged with the Montero estate. At the bottom, her signature looked small and frightened beside his elegant one. She read it again and again until her vision blurred. The door creaked softly behind her. She turned. Adrian stood in the doorway, no tie, his sleeves rolled up. The stormlight from the window drew sharp lines across his face. "I see you found the contract," he said. She set the folder down gently. "I already signed it. There is no need to remind me." He studied her for a moment. "You think I wanted this?" Her voice came out quieter than she intended. "No, but I think you had a choice." His jaw tightened. "Choice is a luxury people in my position rarely have. You will understand that one day." He stepped closer, stopping a few feet away. For a moment, the air between them seemed to hum with something that was not quite hostility and not yet understanding. Then he spoke again. "Dinner at 8. Do not be late." He left as quietly as he had entered. When the door closed, Elena exhaled shakily. She walked toward the window and pressed her palm against the cold glass. Down below, the garden stretched wide and perfect, trimmed with precision. Yet not a single flower bloomed. Hours passed. The rain slowed to a drizzle. Somewhere in the mansion, a clock chimed 6 times. She unfolded the photograph of her father and whispered, "I did it, Papa. The workshop is safe. I just have to survive 3 months." Her voice broke at the end. When she turned away, her reflection in the glass had changed. The trembling girl was still there, but behind her eyes was a flicker of quiet resolve. In another room down the hall, Adrian stood by his desk, looking at the same contract. He had read it 100 times, but something about her calm acceptance unsettled him. She had not argued, not begged for comfort. He poured a glass of whiskey and watched the rain slide down the window. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a thought whispered a warning he ignored. Paper can bind 2 people by law, but it cannot keep their hearts apart forever. The rain finally stopped the following morning, leaving the city wrapped in a pale silver mist. The Blackwood mansion stood quiet, its vast hallways echoing only with the faint ticking of the antique clock above the grand staircase. Elena woke early. She sat at the edge of the bed, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The white sheets around her were still untouched, as if she had been too afraid to disturb the perfection of the room. When she opened the curtains, light spilled across the floor, revealing her wedding dress folded neatly on the armchair. It looked almost ghostly now, the symbol of everything she had lost and everything she had yet to endure. She changed into a plain gray sweater and dark jeans, clothes she had brought from her father's home. They made her feel real again, human in a place that seemed built for statues. Downstairs, the smell of fresh coffee drifted from the dining room. The long mahogany table could seat 20 guests, but only one place had been set. Adrian sat at the far end, reading the morning paper. His silver watch gleamed under the chandelier light. When she entered, he did not look up. "Good morning," she said softly. He turned a page. "Breakfast is served at 7. You are late." "I did not know there was a clock in my room," she replied, her voice steady but polite. He folded the newspaper, eyes meeting hers for the first time that day. "There is. You did not notice it." Their eyes held for a brief, tense moment before he gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit. Eat." She took the seat quietly. The plate in front of her held eggs, toast, and a bowl of fresh berries. She realized she was not hungry, but the silence in the room was louder than any protest she could make. Adrian spoke without lifting his gaze. "Your stepmother called this morning. She wanted confirmation that the Montero debt transfer has been processed. I told her it was." Elena's fork paused midway. "She called you?" He nodded once. "Apparently she has a habit of checking in on investments." The words landed like a slap, but Elena forced herself to stay composed. "I suppose I am one of them now." He set the paper aside. "You chose to sign the contract, Elena. I did not force your hand." Her voice trembled only slightly. "You are right. But sometimes survival is not a choice. It is an instinct." For a moment, Adrian said nothing. His expression softened, only for a second, before the familiar cold mask returned. "I do not expect you to understand my world. Just follow the rules, and these 3 months will pass quickly." She nodded, though the words stung. After breakfast, Elena wandered through the mansion's east wing. Every hallway seemed to stretch endlessly, lined with paintings of stern ancestors and landscapes frozen in time. The stillness pressed on her chest until she found a door at the far end that led to the greenhouse. Inside, the air was warm and heavy with the scent of damp soil. Rows of potted plants filled the glass room, most of them neglected. Dust lay thick on the leaves, but at the center stood a single flowering vine with delicate white blooms. She reached out to touch one petal, and for the first time since the wedding, she smiled. Behind her, a voice startled her. "No one has been in here for years." She turned quickly. It was Mrs. Helen, the head housekeeper. The older woman's sharp eyes softened as she looked at Elena. "Mr. Blackwood used to visit this place when his mother was alive. After she passed, he locked it up." Elena looked back at the flowers. "It is beautiful. It would be a shame to let it die." Mrs. Helen hesitated, then nodded. "If you want to tend to it, I can bring the tools." "Thank you," Elena said, her smile faint but sincere. Later that afternoon, as she knelt among the plants, trimming and watering, she felt something shift within her. The greenhouse became a small refuge from the cold formality of the mansion. Each petal she revived felt like a quiet rebellion against the contract that bound her. From the upper balcony, Adrian watched unseen. He had returned from a conference call and noticed the faint movement through the glass roof. For a long moment he stood there, arms folded, watching her brush dust from the leaves and tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Something about her calm determination unsettled him again. She was not the gold digger the tabloids had painted her to be. She moved with patience, not calculation. When Mrs. Helen approached him later with the day's schedule, he asked casually, "Who authorized her to use the greenhouse?" She asked politely, "Sir. I thought it would do no harm." "Oh." He said nothing more. But that night, as he worked late in his study, the scent of jasmine from the greenhouse drifted faintly through the open window, reminding him of something he could not name. Meanwhile, in her room, Elena opened her small wooden jewelry box. Inside lay a single locket her mother's. She whispered to herself, 3 months, just 3 months, and then I will leave with my dignity. Oh. The mansion's lights dimmed one by one until only the soft glow from the east wing remained. Outside, the last raindrops slid down the glass roof of the greenhouse, falling silently onto the soil she had just touched. And somewhere between those walls of stone and glass, a fragile seed of change had begun to take root. The morning sun cut through the fog that usually lingered around the Blackwood estate. For the first time since her wedding, Elena awoke to light instead of rain. She sat up slowly, blinking as warmth touched her face. Outside the window, the garden below shimmered with dew, and for a brief, impossible moment, it looked almost alive. Today was the day of the official photo session, the one arranged by the Blackwood public relations team to announce their union to the world. Adrian had mentioned it only in passing the night before, as if it were nothing more than another meeting on his calendar. "Be ready by 10, he had said, without looking up from his laptop. Now, as the clock on the nightstand struck 9, Elena stood before the mirror. The housekeeper, Mrs. Helen, adjusted the simple ivory dress that had been delivered to her room. "You look lovely, dear," the woman said softly, her tone kind but cautious. "The press will be watching closely today." Elena forced a small smile. "They can watch all they want. I am used to being invisible." Mrs. Helen sighed. "Try not to think like that. The world remembers what it wants to remember. Sometimes it surprises you." By 10, she stood at the base of the grand staircase. Adrian was already there, speaking with 2 men in dark suits. His presence filled the room, controlled and commanding, his posture straight as stone. When he turned toward her, something unreadable flickered across his face just for a heartbeat before it disappeared behind his usual calm. "You are on time," he said simply. "I learn fast," she replied. The photographer arranged them near the tall windows of the ballroom. Outside, sunlight spilled across the marble floors, catching in the gold filigree of the drapes. "Closer, please," the photographer instructed. Elena hesitated, standing stiffly beside Adrian. He placed a polite hand at her waist, barely touching her, as the camera clicked. The light flashed again and again, each burst freezing their hollow smiles into permanent images. At one point, the photographer encouraged them to face each other. Adrian's gaze locked with hers. "Relax," he murmured, too quietly for the others to hear. "They can sense fear in photos." She almost laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Then this picture will tell the truth." His mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but something close. The photographer snapped again, catching that fraction of warmth before it vanished. When the session ended, Elena excused herself and slipped into the garden. The greenhouse door was open, sunlight pouring through the glass roof. The plants she had tended the day before looked brighter already, their leaves glistening. She exhaled slowly, letting the quiet soak into her bones. It was there, among the flowers, that she heard footsteps behind her. "I see you have found a better use for your time than morning meetings," Adrian's voice said. She turned. He stood at the doorway, his tie loosened, sleeves rolled to his forearms. The way the light hit him made the sharp angles of his face look softer somehow. "I needed air," she said. "This place feels real. The rest of the house does not." He stepped closer, glancing at the revived plants. "You did this?" "Yes. They were suffocating under dust. They only needed care." He nodded once. "You sound certain of that." "I am," she said. "Things that are neglected do not die right away. They wait, hoping someone will notice." "Oh." Her words hung in the air longer than either of them expected. Adrian looked away first. "Dinner tonight will be at the Langford Hotel. It is a charity gala. You will attend as Mrs. Blackwood." She frowned slightly. "You want me there for appearances?" He met her gaze again. "Appearances are the only currency that matters in my world." "Then I will do my part," she said quietly. That evening, the city shimmered under golden lights as their limousine pulled up to the Langford Hotel. The moment Elena stepped out, flashes exploded from every direction. Reporters shouted questions. The crowd surged closer. Adrian placed a steadying hand on her back, guiding her through. Inside, the ballroom was filled with the city's most powerful names: politicians, investors, celebrities. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, and the music of a live orchestra drifted through the air. As they entered, conversations hushed briefly. People turned to look, their eyes scanning Elena from head to toe. She could feel the judgment ripple through the room. A woman near the bar whispered loudly enough for her to hear. "That is her? The poor girl he married for business?" Another voice chuckled. "He must be bored." Elena's stomach tightened, but before she could step back, Adrian's hand tightened gently around hers. He leaned down, his voice steady but firm. "Do not look away." She lifted her chin and met the curious stares with quiet defiance. Minutes later, a guest approached a sharp-eyed man in a tailored suit. "Adrian, congratulations," he said with a thin smile. "And this must be your wife. Quite a surprise, I must say." Adrian's reply was smooth but edged with steel. "Yes, she is my wife, and she is the reason I am here tonight instead of at another meeting." The man blinked, startled. "Of course, my mistake. As they walked away, Elena whispered, You did not have to defend me. He looked straight ahead. I was not defending you. I was correcting them. But as the evening went on, she noticed something in him begin to shift. Each time someone tried to belittle her, he answered with quiet authority. Each time she spoke, he listened, really listened. When the orchestra began its final song, Adrian leaned closer and said softly, "You did well tonight." "So did you," she replied. As they left the gala and the limousine door closed behind them, the city lights blurred past the window. For the first time, the silence between them did not feel heavy. It felt like the beginning of something neither of them dared to name. The next morning arrived quietly, wrapped in the pale gold light of dawn. The Blackwood mansion was still, except for the faint sound of footsteps echoing down the corridor. Elena stood by the window of her room, watching sunlight spill across the garden. The world outside looked peaceful, but inside her chest, unease grew like a whisper she could not silence. The gala from the night before had left her restless. Adrian's unexpected defense of her still replayed in her mind. Each time she thought about it, her heart tightened in confusion. She did not understand why he had stood up for her in front of everyone, nor why his words had sounded less like duty and more like truth. She touched the edge of the windowsill and whispered to herself, "Do not read too much into kindness that is not meant for you." Downstairs, the smell of coffee drifted through the air. Elena descended the grand staircase and paused when she heard voices from the dining room. Adrian was speaking with someone. "Yes, cancel the Singapore meeting," he said into his phone. "We will reschedule when the merger stabilizes." He hung up just as she stepped inside. His expression softened slightly. "You are awake early." "I could not sleep," she admitted. "The house is too quiet." He gestured toward the table. "Sit. Have breakfast." A maid placed a tray before her: eggs, toast, and fruit, the same as always. Yet something felt different today. The air between them no longer carried the same sharp coldness it once had. After a moment, Adrian said, "About last night. You handled yourself well. The press already released the photographs. They are calling you elegant." She blinked, surprised. "Elegant? That is generous of them." "It is accurate," he said simply. For a brief second, she thought she saw a hint of warmth in his eyes. But before she could answer, he changed the subject. "You will be meeting with my grandmother later. She asked to see you." Elena froze. "Your grandmother?" "Yes. She is the only person in my family who still lives nearby. She prefers to know the people around me personally." "Should I prepare something?" "Just be yourself," he said, standing to leave. "She will see through anything else." By afternoon, a black car arrived to take her to the family estate outside the city. Mrs. Helen accompanied her, offering gentle conversation during the drive. When they arrived, the gate opened onto a garden filled with lavender and old oak trees. The house was smaller than Adrian's mansion, but it radiated warmth. An elderly woman waited on the porch, wrapped in a pale blue shawl. Her eyes were sharp, but her smile was kind. "You must be Elena," she said. "Come closer, child. Let me see you." Elena approached respectfully and extended her hand. "It is an honor to meet you, Mrs. Blackwood." "Call me Eleanor," the woman replied. "Mrs. Blackwood sounds far too serious. Come inside. I made tea." They sat together in the sunlit parlor, the scent of jasmine filling the air. Eleanor poured tea into delicate porcelain cups. "So," she began, "you married my grandson. Tell me honestly, how is he treating you?" Elena hesitated, unsure what to say. "He is fair," she said carefully. "He keeps his promises." Eleanor's eyes twinkled. "Fair is a polite word for distant. He has been that way since his parents died. I have tried for years to soften him, but he builds walls faster than I can tear them down." Elena lowered her gaze. "Perhaps he needs time." Perhaps," Eleanor said softly. "Or perhaps he needs someone who does not give up on him." Elena felt her chest tighten at the gentle challenge hidden in those words. "I am not sure I am that person," she admitted. "Then why did you marry him?" The question was simple, but it hit like a blade. Elena answered honestly, "To protect my father's legacy. My stepmother left me no choice." Eleanor studied her quietly, then nodded. "That may have been the reason you began, but reasons can change." As they finished tea, Eleanor reached across the table and took her hand. "You remind me of Adrian's mother. She had the same quiet strength." Elena smiled faintly. Thank you. That means more than you know. When she returned to the mansion that evening, Adrian was waiting near the fireplace, reviewing documents. He looked up as soon as she entered. How did it go? She is kind, Elena said. She spoke of you with pride. Adrian's expression flickered. She should not have burdened you with old stories. They were not a burden. She said you used to love the greenhouse. He glanced toward the window, where the faint outline of the greenhouse roof glowed under the moonlight. That was a long time ago. Elena stepped closer, her voice gentle. Maybe it does not have to be. He looked at her then, really looked. The silence stretched until he finally said, Dinner will be served soon. But as she turned to leave, she heard him say softly, almost to himself, You remind her of my mother. That night, as Elena lay in bed, she could not stop thinking about the way he had said it, not as an accusation, but as something closer to admiration. The rain had not returned, yet the sound of it seemed to echo in her mind. Across the hall, Adrian stood by his office window, watching the lights flicker over the garden. For reasons he could not explain, the mansion did not feel quite as empty as before. And though neither of them knew it, that quiet day marked the first crack in the walls that had kept their hearts apart. The following week unfolded in quiet repetition. The Blackwood mansion, once a cage of silence, now carried faint traces of life. The greenhouse filled with light again. The scent of soil and blossoms drifted through the east hallway every morning. Mrs. Helen began leaving the garden door slightly open, pretending it was a coincidence, though everyone knew who kept it alive. Elena worked there daily, tending to the flowers with steady hands. She found peace among the small sounds, the drip of water, the rustle of leaves, the hum of bees that had returned after years of absence. Each evening she washed her hands, looked at the faint dirt under her nails, and felt something she had not felt in months' purpose. But not everyone in the mansion saw her that way. Mrs. Helen had grown protective of her, but the rest of the staff whispered quietly. They had served Adrian for years and were used to his order, his discipline, his solitude. Now there was a new presence in his world, a woman they barely knew. Some pitied her. Others doubted her intentions. One morning, as Elena passed through the kitchen carrying a basket of fresh herbs, two maids stopped talking mid-sentence. She caught fragments of their hushed conversation. Not like any of the women he used to date. She will not last the 3 months. She is too soft for this house. Elena kept walking. Their words stung, but she did not respond. She reminded herself that she had not come here to win hearts. She had come to endure. When she reached the dining room, Adrian was already there. The morning light caught the edge of his cufflinks as he signed a document. His tone was calm when he said, "Good morning." She placed the basket on the table. "These are from the greenhouse. You could use them in your tea." He glanced at the basket, then at her. "You have changed that place." "It only needed attention," she said. He leaned back slightly, studying her face. "That seems to be your answer to everything." She met his gaze evenly, maybe because it is true. Something flickered behind his calm eyes, something like reluctant respect. He closed the document and stood. "There is a dinner tonight with the board. You will not be attending. It will be late." She nodded. "Understood." As he left for the office, Mrs. Helen entered with a tray of tea. The older woman gave Elena a look that was half concern, half approval. "You handled him well," she said. "Most people do not." Elena smiled faintly. "He only appears difficult. I think he is just tired of people pretending to understand him." "Mrs." Helen poured the tea and lowered her voice. "Be careful, dear. This house has a way of testing anyone who tries to bring warmth into it." That evening, the mansion fell quiet once more. Adrian had not returned yet. Rain had begun again, soft at first, then steady. Elena walked through the hallway and paused by the grand piano in the living room. Its surface gleamed, untouched, though she noticed a faint layer of dust near the keys. Her father had taught her to play when she was a child, before the world had turned unkind. She hesitated only a moment before lifting the cover and pressing a single note. The sound filled the room like a heartbeat. She played softly, slowly, letting the melody rise and fall like breathing. When the front doors opened later that night, Adrian paused in the entryway. He stood still, listening. The music floated down the hall, clear and haunting. He followed the sound until he reached the doorway. Elena sat at the piano, eyes closed. her hair falling loosely over her shoulders. She did not notice him until the last note faded. When she looked up, their eyes met. "I did not mean to disturb the house," she said quickly, rising. He shook his head. "You did not." His voice was quieter than usual, almost thoughtful. "That song, what is it?" "My father used to call it home," she said. "He wrote it for my mother before she passed." "Oh," Adrian stepped closer, the distance between them smaller than it had ever been. "You play beautifully." "Thank you," she said softly. "Music helps me remember who I am." He nodded, his expression unreadable. "You should play more often. This house could use the sound." Then, as if realizing he had said too much, he turned and left for his study. Elena stood for a moment, listening to the echo of his footsteps fade away. She sat back down, pressed another note, and smiled to herself. For the first time since she arrived, the mansion did not feel entirely empty. Later that night, Adrian sat at his desk with a glass of whiskey untouched beside the papers. The melody from the piano still lingered in his mind. He closed the contract file he had been reading and leaned back, staring into the dim light. He did not understand what was happening to him. The woman who had entered his life as a business arrangement was becoming something more complicated, something he could not control. Outside, the rain continued to fall, tapping against the windows of 2 rooms where sleep refused to come. In one, a woman held on to music to keep herself whole. In the other, a man began to wonder if the walls he had built around his heart were starting to crack. The next day arrived with the pale light of early morning stretching through the curtains of the dining room. The mansion was unusually quiet. Only the faint hum of the clock and the clinking of cutlery broke the stillness. Adrian sat at the far end of the long table, reading through a stack of reports. Elena entered softly, carrying the scent of jasmine and rain with her. "Good morning," she said. He nodded once, still focused on the papers. "Morning." "Oh." She took her usual seat, trying not to disturb the silence. A maid placed her breakfast before her and withdrew quickly. The table between them felt like a river of unspoken words. Elena finally asked, "Did the board dinner go well?" Adrian lowered the paper, his eyes sharp yet calm. "It went as expected. Numbers and politics. Nothing worth repeating." She gave a small smile. "That sounds exhausting." "It always is," he replied. Then after a pause, he added, "You played the piano last night." Her fork froze halfway. "Did it disturb you?" "No," he said quietly. "It was unexpected, but not unpleasant." The simplicity of his words startled her. She nodded once. "I am glad." For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The morning sun lit the table in gold, and Adrian studied her across the distance. There was something different in her now, still quiet, still cautious, but stronger. He saw the same steadiness that had once reminded him of his mother. When breakfast ended, he rose and gathered his papers. "I will be out for most of the day. The company has an investor meeting at the Hilton." She looked up. "Would you like me to prepare anything for your return?" He hesitated, as if surprised by the question. "No. But thank you." After he left, the house fell back into stillness. Elena returned to the greenhouse. The vines had begun to bloom, their petals unfurling under the sunlight. She knelt to trim the stems, humming softly. Each day that passed, she felt herself changing. What had begun as endurance was turning into quiet strength. By late afternoon, clouds gathered again over the estate. Thunder rolled distantly. Elena stood on the terrace, watching the sky darken. She thought about her father's workshop and how the scent of wood shavings had filled the air there. That scent had meant safety, something she no longer had. Behind her, the door opened. Mrs. Helen entered, carrying a silver tray with tea. "You have been standing here for an hour," she said. "You will catch a chill." Elena smiled faintly. "I was waiting for the rain. It reminds me of home." Mrs. Helen placed the tray down and looked at her with quiet understanding. "You bring warmth to this place, Mrs. Blackwood. Even Mr. Adrian notices it, though he would rather face a hurricane than admit it." Elena's smile deepened, though she said nothing. That evening, when Adrian returned, the rain had already begun. He removed his coat and paused in the entryway, glancing toward the piano. The lid was open again. The melody that drifted through the house was the same one she had played before, gentle, haunting, alive. He followed the sound into the living room. She sat at the piano, unaware he was there. Her fingers moved gracefully across the keys, her eyes half closed. The light from the chandelier shimmered on her hair. When the song ended, she looked up and saw him. "You are home early," she said softly. "I finished sooner than expected," he replied. "It seems this house sounds better when you are in it." Her cheeks warmed, but she smiled. Then maybe it was waiting for someone to listen. He did not answer. Instead, he walked closer, stopping just beside the piano. The tension between them was no longer sharp, it was fragile, almost tender. "Play another," he said. She hesitated, then began again, her fingers gliding over the keys. Adrian stood silently beside her, the music filling the empty mansion once more. For that brief evening, neither of them spoke about contracts, promises, or obligations. There was only the sound of rain against the windows, the warmth of shared silence, and the quiet realization that something between them had begun to change. The following week brought clear skies, and with them came new expectations. The press had begun to take notice of the marriage that once looked like a cold transaction. Photographs from the charity gala still circulated online images of Elena and Adrian standing side by side, her expression calm and poised, his gaze quietly protective. Reporters called it the unlikely alliance of the year. Adrian's publicist called it good for business. But to Elena, it was only another test. That morning, Adrian stood by the grand staircase, speaking with his assistant, Daniel Hayes. The young man's voice carried softly through the hall. "The Langford Foundation has invited you both to their next gala, sir. They would like you and Mrs. Blackwood to attend as guests of honor." Adrian gave a brief nod. "Confirm the attendance and arrange for a car." Daniel turned to leave, but Adrian added, "Make sure Mrs. Blackwood is informed properly this time." "Yes, sir," Daniel said with a faint smile. Elena appeared just as the assistant walked away. "Good morning," she greeted. Adrian looked at her for a moment, taking in her light gray dress and the book she held in her hand. "Morning," he replied. "You have a busy evening ahead." She frowned slightly. "Another event?" "The Langford Gala. You handled the last one well. They expect both of us." She hesitated, then nodded. "If that is what you need." "It is not about what I need," he said. "It is about what they expect." She smiled faintly. "Then I suppose I will try not to disappoint them." That night, the ballroom at the Langford Hotel gleamed brighter than before. Chandeliers bathed the marble floor in golden light, and violins sang softly through the air. The moment they entered, cameras turned. Reporters whispered her name, their flashbulbs blinking like stars. Adrian guided her through the crowd, his hand steady at her back. It was a small gesture, almost formal, yet it sent warmth through her that she did not want to acknowledge. They greeted investors, shook hands, smiled for photographs. Every move was calculated, yet somehow natural between them now. During dinner, the conversation at their table drifted from business to gossip. A man in an expensive suit leaned forward with a glass of champagne. "Mr. Blackwood," he said, "you have surprised us all. We thought you would never settle down. Your wife must be extraordinary." Adrian glanced at Elena, his tone even. "She is." The table laughed politely, but Elena felt her heart stir at the quiet sincerity in his voice. When the orchestra began its next piece, couples moved to the dance floor. Adrian stood and extended a hand. "We should join them." Elena froze. "I do not dance." His mouth curved slightly. "Neither do I. But they will expect us to." Her hand trembled slightly as she placed it in his. The orchestra swelled. He led her to the center of the floor. At first, her movements were stiff, uncertain, but Adrian's grip was steady. "Relax," he whispered. "Let me guide you." She exhaled slowly, letting the rhythm pull her forward. The crowd around them blurred into color and motion. For the first time, the distance between them felt smaller than the music that filled it. "You are learning quickly," he murmured. "I have a patient teacher," she replied. He looked down at her then, really seeing her. "You have no idea how wrong you are." For a moment, the world seemed to fade, the sound of laughter, the glitter of lights, even the whispers that followed them. There was only the warmth of his hand at her back and the steady rhythm of their steps. When the song ended, Applause filled the room. Adrian guided her off the floor. As they passed a group of reporters, one called out, "Mr. Blackwood, your wife seems to have stolen the spotlight tonight." Adrian smiled slightly, something rare and unguarded. "She tends to do that," he said before walking away with her. Later, outside the hotel, the night air felt cool and alive. The city lights shimmered across the wet streets. The limousine waited near the curb, but for a moment, neither of them moved to enter. Elena turned toward him. "You did not have to say those things in there." "I said them because they were true," he answered. Her breath caught. "Adrian," he looked down at her, his expression unreadable. "You do not have to thank me, Elena. You are doing better than I expected. The board sees it. The press sees it. Even I see it." "I was not looking for approval," she said softly. "Only honesty." He studied her face for a long moment. "Then here is honesty," he said quietly. "You make this arrangement feel less like a burden." The words lingered between them, carried by the hum of traffic and the cool wind that swept down the avenue. When they finally entered the car, silence followed, but it was no longer the heavy kind that filled the mansion. It was gentle, fragile, filled with the echoes of everything neither dared to say aloud. As the limousine pulled away, the reflection of city lights danced across their faces. Elena looked out the window, her heart both heavy and light at the same time. She did not notice Adrian watching her, his gaze quiet, thoughtful, and strangely protective. For the first time since their wedding, they were no longer two strangers bound by paper. They were something new, something fragile, uncertain, and real. The days following the gala felt strangely lighter. The mansion no longer seemed like a cage of marble and silence. Music filled the hallways again. Soft laughter echoed in the greenhouse. And for the first time, sunlight reached places that had been hidden in shadow for years. Elena spent most mornings tending to the flowers, humming softly while the sound of the fountain drifted through the glass walls. Occasionally, she would see Adrian standing by the terrace, a cup of coffee in his hand, watching her with a quiet look he never explained. He had stopped giving her orders about schedules or appearances. Instead, he began asking small questions: what she liked for breakfast, what books she read, what songs she played at night. Their exchanges were brief but steady, building a rhythm between them neither dared to name. One afternoon, she was in the library arranging books when he entered. "You have changed this room," he said, looking at the open curtains and the sunlight streaming in. "It needed air," she replied. "You cannot breathe in darkness forever." He smiled faintly. "You say that as if you have tried." "I have," she said softly. "And I do not recommend it." He looked at her for a long moment, the air between them thick with quiet understanding. "You are not like anyone I have ever met," he said finally. Elena turned toward the shelves, her hands trembling slightly. "That is because I do not belong in your world." "Maybe not," he said, "but you make it better." "Oh." She froze, unsure if she had heard him correctly. Before she could respond, the sound of a phone interrupted the moment. Adrian glanced at the screen, his expression hardening. "The board needs me downtown," he said. "We will continue this later." He left, and the warmth that had filled the room faded with him. That evening, rain began to fall again, gentle at first, then steady. Elena walked to the piano, letting her fingers find the familiar melody of her father's song. The notes echoed softly through the halls, weaving between the shadows. When the doorbell rang, Mrs. Helen hurried to answer it. A woman's voice filled the entryway, sharp and confident. "Tell him Veronica Montero is here." Elena's breath caught. Her stepmother's name felt like a ghost crawling back into her chest. Moments later, Veronica appeared in the doorway of the music room, perfectly dressed, her eyes cold and assessing. "Well," she said, her smile thin. "Look at you, Mrs. Blackwood." "One." Elena stood slowly. "Why are you here?" "Because I can be," Veronica said smoothly. "I wanted to see how well my investment turned out." "This is not your business," Elena said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Oh, it is very much my business," Veronica replied. "Do not forget, I arranged this marriage to save that little workshop your father left you. You should be thanking me, not hiding behind charity events and piano music." Elena's fingers curled into fists. "You sold me, Veronica." "Do not call that saving." Veronica tilted her head. You always were dramatic. I did what needed to be done, and clearly, it worked. You are living in luxury now." Before Elena could answer, Adrian's voice came from the hallway. "That is enough." Both women turned. He stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Montero, you were not invited." Veronica gave a practiced smile. "Oh, Adrian, I came only to congratulate you. The press cannot stop talking about you two. It seems your little arrangement is paying off." "Leave," he said evenly. Her smile faltered. "You are making a mistake dismissing me like this. I still have connections, and you know how easily rumors start." He stepped closer, his tone sharp. "Rumors start when people talk without consequence. I assure you, you would not want to test that." For a moment, silence filled the air. Then Veronica's expression hardened. "Careful, Adrian. You are starting to sound protective." She turned to Elena. "Enjoy it while it lasts. When the contract ends, you will be nothing more than a name he forgets." She left, her heels striking the marble like gunshots. When the door finally closed, Elena turned away, trembling. Adrian approached her slowly. "Are you all right?" "I should be," she said, her voice quiet. "But it still hurts to see her." "She will not come here again," he said firmly. Elena met his gaze. "You defended me. Again." "No. Because it was the right thing to do," he replied. "It feels like more than that," she said softly. He hesitated, his voice lowering. "Maybe it is." For a long moment, neither spoke. The rain outside deepened, the sound wrapping the room in a cocoon of silver and quiet. Elena looked down at the piano keys, her reflection trembling on the polished surface. "You cannot keep protecting me forever, Adrian. One day, I have to stand on my own." He stepped closer. "I am not trying to protect you. I am trying to understand you." She lifted her head, meeting his eyes. "And what have you understood so far?" "That you are the only real thing in a world full of lies," he said simply. The words hung in the air, fragile and dangerous. Outside, lightning flashed over the garden, illuminating the greenhouse where the flowers she had planted now bloomed in full color. Inside, two people who had once signed a paper for convenience stood in silence, realizing that what bound them now was something no contract could ever define. The next few days passed in a quiet rhythm that neither Elena nor Adrian dared to disturb. After Veronica's unexpected visit, the mansion seemed to hold its breath, as if the walls themselves were listening for the next tremor of tension. But instead of anger or distance, something different settled between them, an unspoken closeness, fragile but steady, like the faint light that lingers after a storm. Elena found herself walking the garden paths every morning, trimming the vines and collecting petals that had fallen overnight. The greenhouse was now alive, filled with the soft hum of bees and the scent of jasmine. Sometimes, she would look up from her work and see Adrian watching from the terrace, his expression unreadable. He no longer hid behind formality. When their eyes met, he would nod slightly, as if acknowledging something that words could not hold. That afternoon, while she arranged flowers in a vase for the dining room, Mrs. Helen entered with a letter. "This came for you, Mrs. Blackwood," she said, handing over an envelope sealed in gold. Elena turned it over. "From whom?" "The Langford Foundation," Mrs. Helen said. "They are inviting you and Mr. Blackwood to their charity auction next week." Elena smiled faintly. "Another gala." Mrs. Helen returned the smile. "You are becoming quite the social favorite." Elena's laughter was soft. "I am not sure I belong in that world." "Perhaps not," Mrs. Helen said kindly. "But sometimes, belonging has nothing to do with wealth. It has to do with how you make others feel." That evening, Adrian found her in the library again, the same place where their conversation had once been interrupted. The light from the fireplace cast a warm glow across the room. He stood by the door for a moment before saying, "You received an invitation." She looked up from her book. "Yes. Another event." He stepped closer. "You do not have to attend if you do not wish to. The board can handle appearances for a while." She shook her head. "No. I will go. You should not face them alone." He smiled slightly. "You sound like my grandmother." "Is that an insult or a compliment?" she asked. He chuckled quietly, the sound rare and genuine. A compliment. For a while they sat in comfortable silence. The fire crackled softly, filling the pauses between their thoughts. Finally, Adrian spoke. Do you ever regret signing that contract? Elena looked at him carefully. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had said no. But regret? No. My father's workshop still stands. That is all that mattered to me. And now? He asked. Now, she said after a pause. I am beginning to care about things that have nothing to do with survival. Her words lingered in the quiet air. He looked at her with a mixture of surprise and something deeper, something like hope. The next day brought a rare warmth to the city. Adrian had meetings downtown, so Elena spent the morning walking through the local market, escorted by one of the drivers. The vendors recognized her from the news, but treated her kindly. She bought small bundles of wildflowers and a few handmade trinkets to decorate the greenhouse. As she was leaving, an elderly florist smiled at her. You are Mrs. Blackwood, yes? The papers say you bring life back to that big house on the hill. Elena blushed. I just like taking care of things that grow. Then your heart is already rich, the woman said. Do not let that world of marble and diamonds make you forget it. When Elena returned home, Adrian was waiting by the door, his tie loosened, his expression softer than usual. You went out, he said. Yes, just for a walk, she replied. He noticed the flowers in her hand. Those are not from the garden. They are from the market, she said. They reminded me of my father's shop. He nodded, watching as she arranged the flowers in a vase near the piano. You bring color into every room you touch, he said quietly. She looked up at him. That is not a bad thing, is it? No, he said, his voice low. It is not bad at all. The evening settled slowly over the mansion. Dinner passed without the usual stiffness. Adrian even asked about the greenhouse, and Elena spoke with ease, her voice animated and light. The walls that had separated them began to thin, brick by brick. After dinner, they walked together through the garden. The path glowed under the soft light of the lamps, and the air was filled with the faint perfume of jasmine. Adrian broke the silence first. I used to hate this house, he said. After my parents died, it felt like a museum filled with ghosts. Elena looked at him gently. And now? Now, he said after a pause. It feels like someone finally opened the windows. She smiled, her heart stirring. Maybe it was time. He stopped walking and turned to her. You know, for years I believed that feelings were distractions, but lately I am not so sure. She met his gaze steadily. Feelings are not distractions, Adrian. They are reminders that we are still alive. The quiet that followed was not empty, it was full of meaning. They stood beneath the soft light, surrounded by flowers she had revived, and walls he had once built to keep the world out. Neither of them spoke again, but the way he looked at her said everything words could not. Inside the mansion, the old clock chimed softly, marking another hour. And somewhere between that sound and the scent of blooming jasmine, two hearts that had once signed a contract of duty began to understand the shape of something far more dangerous and far more real than either of them had planned for. The morning after their walk in the garden began with sunlight pouring gently across the marble floors. The Blackwood mansion, once a fortress of silence, now carried a pulse of warmth that no one could deny. But peace rarely lasted long in Adrian's world, and by noon, the first crack appeared. Elena was in the greenhouse, trimming the stems of the white lilies she had planted weeks before, when she heard hurried footsteps approaching. Mrs. Helen entered, her face pale with concern. Mrs. Blackwood, she said quietly, your stepmother has returned to the city, and she was seen at the Blackwood Group offices this morning. Elena froze, the pruning shears slipping slightly in her hand. At the company? Yes, Mrs. Helen confirmed. She met with several members of the board. The staff said she was talking about the marriage contract. A chill spread through Elena's chest. The contract? Why now? I do not know, Mrs. Helen said softly, but it cannot be good. Elena set the shears aside and wiped her hands. Where's Adrian? He left early for meetings downtown. Elena exhaled slowly, fighting the rising wave of dread. Then I suppose she found a way to reach him after all. By late afternoon, Adrian returned, his expression harder than she had seen in weeks. He found her in the greenhouse, her hands still stained with soil. She came to my office, he said. Elena turned slowly. I know. She tried to convince the board that our marriage is part of a financial manipulation, he continued. She brought documents, photographs, and even bank statements. Elena's heart dropped. Bank statements? She claims the Montero estate has been secretly moving funds from my company's charitable trust, he said, his tone sharp. She is suggesting you knew about it. Elena's voice broke. That is a lie. I have never— I know, he interrupted, his voice firm but distant. But the board does not. They want an investigation. Her throat tightened. And what do you believe? For a moment, he said nothing. The silence between them stretched painfully. I want to believe you, he said finally. But her evidence looks convincing. I need time to find out what is true. Her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. You think I could betray you? I think people are not always who they appear to be, he said quietly. The words cut deeper than she expected. She stepped back, her voice trembling. I came into this marriage to save my father's legacy, not to destroy yours. I know, he said, softer now. But the timing, the accounts, everything looks wrong. I need to protect the company. She took a slow breath. And who protects me? Adrian. He looked at her, guilt flickering in his eyes, but he said nothing. He turned away, leaving her standing alone among the flowers she had brought back to life. That evening, the mansion fell into silence again. The laughter that had once filled the halls vanished as quickly as it had come. Elena sat by the piano, her fingers motionless on the keys. The melody she had played so many times now felt hollow. In his study, Adrian paced the floor. He had reviewed the documents Veronica brought, and while many details looked fabricated, a few appeared disturbingly real. He hated himself for even considering the possibility that Elena could be part of it, but the weight of the company and his pride pressed against him like a chain. Late that night, Mrs. Helen entered quietly. Mr. Blackwood, she said, I have known that girl since the day she arrived. Whatever her stepmother is saying, I do not believe a word of it. Adrian rubbed a hand across his face. I want to believe that too. But if she is lying, I have to know before this destroys everything. No, Mrs. Helen's voice softened. You are letting fear speak louder than truth. He did not answer. Meanwhile, in her room, Elena packed a small suitcase. She could not bear to stay where her integrity was doubted. She folded her father's photograph carefully between layers of clothing and took one last look around the room. The mansion had felt like a prison once, then like a fragile home. Now, it was neither. When she reached the door, she paused. The greenhouse light glowed faintly outside, the plants inside moving gently in the night breeze. She whispered, I will not let her destroy me again. Before dawn, she left the house quietly. The gate closed behind her with a final echo that carried through the empty halls. When Adrian awoke hours later, the mansion felt wrong. The piano was silent, the breakfast table untouched, and the greenhouse door left ajar. Mrs. Helen found the letter first. He unfolded it slowly. Adrian, I have no way to prove my innocence right now, and I refuse to live under suspicion. You once told me that feelings were distractions. Maybe you were right, but what I felt for you was real, even if it was never meant to be. I hope one day you will see the truth for yourself. Elena. He read it twice, his hands tightening around the paper. Outside, the garden she had nurtured was blooming wildly, alive with color and fragrance. But the woman who had given it life was gone. For the first time in years, Adrian realized what emptiness truly meant, not the kind that came from solitude, but the kind that came from losing something you never intended to need. The house that once belonged only to him now felt colder than it ever had before. The news spread quietly but quickly. By the end of the week, the tabloids were filled with headlines about the disappearing Mrs. Blackwood. Some called it a scandal, others a separation. The photos from the charity gala, once symbols of elegance, were now used as evidence of deceit. Inside the Blackwood mansion, the silence was heavy once again. Adrian walked through the hallways each morning, passing rooms that once carried laughter and music. The piano remained untouched, its keys collecting dust. The greenhouse, once alive with color, had begun to wilt. Days turned into weeks, and still, there was no word from Elena. He had tried to focus on work, on the investigation into the accusations her stepmother had made, but something inside him refused to rest. Every document he reviewed, every report he read, felt meaningless. He told himself it was about protecting the company, but deep down, He knew it was something else entirely. One night, as rain poured outside, Daniel, his assistant, entered the study carrying a file. "Sir," he said carefully, "the audit you requested is complete." Adrian did not look up. "And?" Daniel hesitated. "It appears Mrs. Montero fabricated everything. The bank records were altered. The signatures were forged. Mrs. Blackwood had no access to any of the accounts." The pen slipped from Adrian's hand. "You are certain?" "Yes, sir. I double-checked with the finance team. She is innocent." Adrian leaned back in his chair, his chest tightening. The realization hit him like a storm. He had doubted her when she had needed him the most. He stood abruptly, his voice low but firm. "Find out where she is." Daniel nodded. "We already tried, sir. There was no record of her flights or hotel check-ins. It is like she disappeared." Adrian turned toward the window, watching the rain slide down the glass. "Then I will find her myself." The next morning, he left the city. He began with her father's old workshop, a small building on the outskirts of town. Dust and sunlight filled the space, but it was empty. Only a few tools remained, carefully cleaned and arranged. On one wall hung a faded photograph of Elena and her father, smiling over a half-built chair. He traced his fingers along the frame and whispered, "Where did you go?" From there, he visited the market she used to frequent. The elderly florist recognized him immediately. "You are the husband," she said gently. "Yes," he admitted. "Have you seen her?" The woman smiled faintly. "She came here a few weeks ago, bought a bouquet of wildflowers, said she was going somewhere quiet. She looked sad but strong." "Did she say where?" The florist shook her head. "Only that she was going back to where things still made sense." Adrian thanked her and returned to his car. He sat there for a long time, thinking about her words. Where things still made sense. That evening, as the sun began to set, he found himself driving toward the countryside, toward the small town where her father's workshop had once supplied hand-carved furniture. The road wound through fields and past rivers that shimmered under the fading light. Eventually, he reached a modest village near the edge of a forest. There, beside a quiet river, he saw a small wooden cabin with smoke rising from its chimney. Flowers grew along the windowsills, and a faint melody drifted through the air, the familiar sound of a piano. He stopped the car and stepped out, his heart pounding. The closer he walked, the clearer the music became. It was the same tune she had played in the mansion, the one she called home. When he reached the porch, he saw her through the window. Elena sat at an old upright piano, her hair falling over her shoulders, her fingers moving gracefully across the keys. She looked peaceful, though there was a sadness in her eyes. He knocked softly. The music stopped. She turned, startled. When she saw him, she froze, her lips parting in disbelief. "Adrian?" she whispered. He stepped inside, rain dripping from his coat. "I found you." She rose slowly. "How?" "Your stepmother made a mistake," he said quietly. "I know the truth now. The evidence was forged. You had nothing to do with it." Her expression remained guarded. "And what does that change?" "Everything," he said. "I should have trusted you. I let fear and pride speak louder than reason." She looked away, her voice trembling. "You believed her, Adrian. You believed the woman who sold me like a transaction." "I know," he said. "And I will spend the rest of my life regretting it. But I am here now, asking for a chance to make it right." Elena crossed her arms, fighting the tears that threatened to fall. "You cannot erase what happened." Loading. "No," he admitted. "But I can prove that it will never happen again." He stepped closer, his voice low and sincere. "You once told me that feelings are reminders that we are still alive. You made me believe that again. Without you, the house, the company, all of it means nothing." For a long moment, silence filled the small cabin. The rain outside softened to a whisper. Finally, Elena spoke. "I do not know if I can go back." "Then let me stay here," he said. "For as long as it takes for you to believe me." Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they were not from pain. She turned back to the piano and pressed one soft note. "If you are going to stay," she said quietly, "then at least listen." Adrian nodded and sat down beside her. As the melody filled the cabin, the tension between them began to fade. replaced by something gentler, something real. For the first time since their wedding, there were no contracts, no lies, and no walls. Only two people who had finally learned the cost of silence and the power of forgiveness. The following morning arrived quietly, wrapped in soft fog that curled over the river outside the cabin. The air smelled of pine and wet earth. Elena sat by the small window, her hands curled around a cup of tea, watching the sunlight break through the clouds. For the first time in weeks, she felt peace, but it was fragile, as if one wrong breath could shatter it. Adrian had stayed true to his word. He had not pressed her to return to the mansion or to the city. Instead, he had helped repair the old fence around the garden and stacked wood near the porch. He moved through the space with quiet respect, careful not to intrude on her silence. That morning, as she prepared breakfast, she saw him outside splitting firewood. The rhythm of his movements was steady, methodical, like a man trying to build penance with every strike. The sight made something inside her ache. She turned away quickly, focusing on the small skillet heating on the stove. When he stepped back inside, his hands were dusted with sawdust, and his hair was damp from the mist. "You should not be working so early," she said without turning. He smiled faintly. "I could say the same to you." They ate together in near silence, the quiet broken only by the soft crackle of the fireplace. After a while, Adrian spoke. "The board has dropped the investigation. Your name is clear." "Ho." Elena looked up, her expression unreadable. "And my stepmother?" "She is under review for fraud," he said. "The law will handle the rest." For a moment, she said nothing. Then she whispered, "Justice took long enough." He nodded. "It did, and I am sorry it came at your expense." The sincerity in his tone made her heart tighten. She studied his face, the exhaustion behind his eyes. "You look tired." "I have been," he admitted, "but not from work." She hesitated, then asked softly, "Why did you come after me, Adrian?" He met her gaze. "Because I realized that everything I built meant nothing without the person who taught me how to feel again." The words lingered between them like the glow of the fire. Elena looked down, her voice barely above a whisper. "You cannot fix everything with words." "I know," he said. "That is why I am here to show you that I am done hiding behind them." He stood and walked toward the door. "I will go to the village. The heater needs new parts. I will be back before noon." When he left, Elena sat still for a long time. She wanted to believe him. Part of her already did. But another part, the one that had learned the hard way what betrayal felt like, told her to protect her heart. By midday, the sun had burned away the fog. Elena stepped outside to gather laundry she had hung near the porch. That was when she heard footsteps approaching. Turning, she saw Mrs. Helen walking down the path, wrapped in a gray coat and carrying a small bag. "Mrs. Helen?" Elena said in surprise. The older woman smiled warmly. "My dear, I had to see you. I found out where you were staying. You cannot imagine how quiet that house feels without you." Elena's chest tightened. "I am sorry. I did not mean to leave without saying goodbye." Mrs. Helen reached for her hand. "You did what you needed to do, but he has been a different man since you left. I have never seen Mr. Adrian so lost." Elena looked down. "He said he wanted to make things right." "Then let him," Mrs. Helen said gently. "You may think forgiveness makes you weak, but it is what makes you free." Before Elena could respond, the sound of a car approached. Adrian stepped out, carrying a small box of supplies. He froze when he saw Mrs. Helen. "Helen, what are you doing here?" She smiled knowingly. "I came to see if the two of you still remembered how to talk to each other." Adrian exhaled softly. "We are learning." Mrs. Helen nodded. "Good, because life is too short to spend it running from what you already know you want." She handed Elena a sealed envelope. "This arrived at the mansion. It is addressed to you." Elena took it carefully. "From who?" Mrs. Helen hesitated. "It is from your father's old business partner. He says he found something that belongs to your family." Elena unfolded the letter. Inside was a note and a small deed to the workshop transferred fully to her name. Tears filled her eyes. Adrian stepped closer, reading the paper over her shoulder. "It is yours again." She nodded, her voice trembling. "It feels like my father is giving me a second chance." Adrian smiled softly. "Maybe we both are." Mrs. Helen squeezed their hands and whispered, I will leave you two to talk." Then she turned and walked back down the path. When she was gone, Elena looked at Adrian. "The workshop needs repairs. The roof leaks, and the walls are weak." He met her gaze steadily. "Then we will fix it, together." She blinked, surprised. "You would do that?" "Yes," he said, "because this time I am not walking away from what matters." For a long moment, she studied his face, the same man who had once been too proud to feel anything, now standing before her with honesty in his eyes. Finally, she said quietly, "All right, we will fix it." The sun began to set behind them, casting a golden glow across the trees. The river reflected their silhouettes, two people who had been broken by circumstance but were slowly, carefully learning how to build again. And as the first stars appeared in the twilight sky, Elena realized something she had not felt in a long time: hope. The following week arrived with the sound of hammers and saws echoing through the small valley. The old workshop that had once belonged to Elena's father was alive again. Dust floated through the sunlight like golden snow, and the scent of wood filled the air. For the first time in years, the place that had shaped her childhood began to breathe once more. Adrian worked beside her, his sleeves rolled up, his hands steady as he repaired the frame of the front door. He was not used to this kind of labor, but he did not complain. Every nail he set, every board he lifted, seemed to carry meaning beyond the work itself. "You are surprisingly good at this," Elena said, brushing sawdust from her hands. He glanced at her, smiling faintly. "Do not sound so shocked. I spent summers at construction sites when I was a teenager. My father said every businessman should know how things are built before learning how to own them." She nodded, her eyes softening. "He was right. He was difficult," Adrian admitted, "but he believed in earning respect, not buying it." They worked in silence for a while, the rhythm of their movements blending into a quiet harmony. The sound of wood against metal, the scent of cedar, and the light laughter that occasionally escaped Elena's lips made the old space feel almost sacred. By noon, they sat outside on the steps, sharing bread and coffee that Mrs. Helen had packed before leaving the city. The air was warm, and the river glimmered beside them. Elena looked at the building they had spent the morning repairing. "It still does not feel real," she said. "For so long, I thought I would never see this place alive again." Adrian turned to her. "You made it come back. You have that effect on everything around you." She smiled faintly, a blush touching her cheeks. "You are giving me too much credit." "Maybe not enough," he said. Their eyes met, and the moment stretched. It was not like the polished exchanges at the mansion or the guarded conversations from their first months of marriage. This was simpler, more human. After a pause, Elena said, "There is something I need to tell you." Adrian's expression grew serious. "What is it?" "It is about my stepmother," she said quietly. "Before I left, she tried to reach out again. She wanted me to sign a document to transfer part of the Montero property to her name. I refused. I think she may try again." Adrian's eyes darkened. "She will not get anywhere near you again. She is dangerous, Adrian. And clever," Elena warned. "She will not stop until she gets what she wants." He leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but firm. "Then we will be ready for her. The difference now is that you are not alone." His certainty eased her fear more than any promise could. For the first time, she felt protected not out of obligation, but out of genuine care. Later that afternoon, they went through boxes of her father's old sketches and tools. Elena opened one marked with his initials and found a faded blueprint rolled tightly inside. She spread it across the table, her fingers tracing the pencil lines. "This was his dream," she whispered. "He wanted to expand the workshop into a community space where young apprentices could learn craftsmanship for free." Adrian studied the design. "It is ambitious, but not impossible." "No." She looked up at him, surprised. "You think it could work?" "Yes," he said. "With proper funding and planning, we could rebuild it. Use part of my company's foundation budget. It would honor him and you." Tears filled her eyes. "You would really do that?" "I would do anything that gives meaning to what we have been through," he said softly. She looked down at the blueprint again, her vision blurring. "He would have liked you," she whispered. Adrian smiled faintly. "I hope so." As the sun began to dip behind the hills, the two of them stood outside the workshop. The golden light washed over the building, highlighting every repaired beam and fresh coat of paint. Elena leaned against the doorframe, her voice thoughtful. It feels strange. The last time I stood here, I was losing everything. Now, it feels like I am finding it again. Adrian looked at her quietly. Maybe that is what home really is, not a place, but a moment when everything that was broken starts to make sense again. She turned to him, her heart full. You sound like my father when you say things like that. Then I am in good company, he said with a small smile. They stayed outside until the stars appeared. Fireflies glowed in the tall grass, and the soft sound of the river blended with the whisper of the wind through the trees. When they finally returned to the cabin, Elena paused at the door. Thank you, she said, for believing in this, and in me. Adrian's voice was quiet but steady. Thank you for giving me a chance to. That night, as the fire crackled inside the small cabin, Elena could not sleep. She sat by the window, watching the stars shimmer over the workshop. For the first time since her father's passing, she felt his presence not as a memory of loss, but as a feeling of peace. And just beyond the glass, she could see Adrian asleep in the chair by the fire, his face softened by the warm glow. A faint smile touched her lips. The man who had once believed that emotions were distractions was now the one teaching her that love could rebuild what life had tried to destroy. The night stretched on, quiet and endless, holding the fragile promise of everything still to come. The following morning began with the scent of rain on the wind. A soft gray light touched the edges of the forest, and the air carried the chill of a coming storm. Inside the cabin, Elena packed a small box of her father's blueprints, wrapping each one carefully in parchment paper. She planned to bring them to the city and begin the process of restoring the workshop officially. Adrian stepped inside from the porch, his hair damp from the morning mist. The forecast says the roads may flood by afternoon, he said. If we leave, we should go now. She nodded and tied the string around the box. Everything is ready. They locked the cabin and loaded the truck. As the tires rolled over the wet dirt path, Elena looked back through the window. The cabin stood small and warm against the gray sky, smoke still curling from the chimney. It had become more than a shelter, it had been their second beginning. The city, however, was waiting with less kindness. When they arrived at the Blackwood mansion later that day, the atmosphere was heavy. Daniel met them at the door with a concerned expression. "Sir, there is something you need to see," he said, handing Adrian a folded newspaper. On the front page was a headline in bold letters. Montero Exposé. Former socialite accuses CEO of manipulation and fraud. Elena's breath caught. Beneath the title was a photo of her stepmother, Veronica, standing before reporters, her expression poised and confident. Adrian scanned the article. Veronica claimed that the Montero fortune had been stolen through the marriage, alleging that Adrian had coerced her stepdaughter into the arrangement for personal gain. She had filed a new lawsuit. Elena felt her pulse quicken. "She is twisting everything," she said. "She is trying to destroy both of us." Adrian folded the paper slowly, his voice calm but hard. "Then this time, we will face her together." He called his legal team immediately, giving precise instructions. Elena stood by the window, staring out at the rain as it began to fall harder. Every drop against the glass felt like an echo of the battles she thought she had already fought. That evening, while Adrian was on a conference call, she walked through the mansion alone. Every corridor reminded her of how far they had come, the cold distance of their wedding day, the silence after every misunderstanding, and the fragile warmth that had grown between them since. When she entered the greenhouse, she froze. The flowers she had planted months ago had begun to wilt. The air smelled faintly of damp soil and neglect. She touched one of the vines gently, whispering, "Not again, not this time." She spent the next hour trimming, watering, and reviving what she could. By the time Adrian found her, her hands were covered in dirt. "You should rest," he said softly from the doorway. "I could not," she replied. "When everything feels like it is breaking again, I need to fix something." He stepped closer. "Then let us fix it all together." Elena looked up at him, her expression both weary and resolute. "Even if she wins the case?" "She will not," he said, "because this time I know what is real." She met his eyes, and in them she saw something unshakable, a quiet conviction that no lie could destroy. As thunder rolled in the distance, Adrian reached for her hand. "No matter what she does, We will not run from it. We will fight for what we built." Elena nodded slowly. "Then let her come." Outside, the storm began to break across the city, wind and rain pounding against the mansion. But inside, they stood side by side in the greenhouse, the same place where their story had first begun to change. The flowers trembled under the thunder's echo, but none of them fell. The following days unfolded like the calm before a storm. The lawsuit filed by Veronica Montero had begun to spread through the media. Television anchors debated the story. Newspapers printed speculative articles, and every headline twisted the truth into something uglier than the day before. But inside the Blackwood mansion, Elena and Adrian faced the chaos with quiet strength. Each morning, the household gathered for briefings from the legal team. Adrian remained composed, his tone firm and unshaken. "We respond with facts," he told them. "No emotion, no reaction. She wants chaos. We will give her proof instead." Elena listened beside him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Though fear lingered in her chest, she refused to let it control her. She had already survived being used and humiliated. Once she would not be broken again. By the end of the week, they had gathered enough evidence to counter every claim. Financial records from the Montero estate revealed that Veronica had embezzled funds years before the marriage ever happened. Witnesses were ready to testify. Still, Adrian knew the fight was not just in the courtroom, it was in the public's perception. Late one night, after another meeting with the attorneys, he found Elena in the greenhouse. She stood barefoot among the flowers, her fingers brushing a row of white orchids. The soft glow of the garden lamps painted her in gold and silver. He watched her for a moment before saying quietly, "You always come here when things fall apart." She turned, her expression gentle. "It helps me remember that something can grow again, even after being cut down." Adrian stepped closer. "You are stronger than anyone I know." She smiled faintly. That strength came from learning how to stand alone. But now? She looked up at him. "Now I am learning what it means to stand with someone." He met her gaze, the distance between them smaller than it had ever been. "Then stand with me tomorrow," he said softly. "At the press conference. No more hiding." Her breath caught. "You want me to appear with you?" "Yes," he said. "You have nothing to be ashamed of, Elena. Let them see who you truly are." The next day arrived gray and cold, the sky heavy with low clouds. Reporters gathered outside the Blackwood Group headquarters, their cameras lined up like soldiers waiting for battle. Adrian and Elena arrived in a black sedan. As they stepped out, the crowd erupted in questions. "Mrs. Blackwood, is it true you married for money? Mr. Blackwood, did you force her into the marriage? Are the Monteros pressing criminal charges?" Elena's heart pounded, but she kept her chin high. Adrian placed a reassuring hand on her back, guiding her toward the podium. When the noise finally settled, he spoke first. "The accusations against my wife and myself are false," he said clearly. "The evidence will prove that Veronica Montero has attempted to manipulate the truth for her own financial gain. But this is not only about defending a company's name. It is about defending integrity." He paused, then turned slightly toward Elena. "My wife will speak for herself." The cameras flashed wildly as Elena stepped forward. Her hands trembled, but her voice was steady. "When my stepmother arranged my marriage, I believed it was the only way to protect my father's legacy. I never expected kindness or love, only survival. But what I found was a man who taught me the value of truth. The accusations against us are lies, and I refuse to live in shame for something I did not do." She took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the crowd. "I am not a victim of my marriage. I am a survivor of deceit, and I will not allow that deceit to win again." Numb. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a murmur spread through the reporters, something that sounded almost like respect. Adrian placed his hand over hers, his voice low but strong. "We have already submitted the documents to the court. Let the truth speak for itself." They left the stage together, walking side by side through the flashing lights. As the car door closed behind them, Elena exhaled deeply, her hands trembling slightly. Adrian turned to her. "You were remarkable." She shook her head. "I was terrified." He smiled faintly. "Courage is not the absence of fear. It is choosing to face it anyway." That evening, the first wave of public reaction began to shift. Several journalists released follow-up reports questioning Veronica's credibility. Legal experts on television began analyzing the falsified records. The tide was slowly turning. In the quiet of their home, Elena returned once more to the greenhouse. She pressed her palm against the glass, watching the city lights shimmer beyond the rain. Adrian joined her, standing close enough that their reflections merged in the glass. "It feels strange," she said softly, "to finally be believed." He looked at her, his voice gentle. "You never needed their belief, Elena. You only needed your own." She smiled faintly. "Maybe, but it helps to have yours too." He reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining among the shadows and light. Outside, the storm began to fade, leaving behind a stillness that felt almost like peace. Inside, two people who had once been bound by a contract now stood united by something stronger: truth. And for the first time, the world had begun to see it too. The storm outside had passed, but another storm was brewing behind closed doors. The court hearings were scheduled to begin within the week, and though the press had started to turn in their favor, Veronica Montero was not finished. She had money, connections, and a ruthless instinct for destruction. Inside the Blackwood mansion, the air carried both tension and determination. The staff moved quietly through the hallways, aware that the smallest misstep could break the fragile calm. Adrian spent his days meeting with lawyers and financial investigators. Elena, meanwhile, worked tirelessly on organizing her father's blueprints, preparing for the launch of the workshop program they had promised to rebuild. Every night, when the house grew still, they found themselves in the greenhouse again. It had become their unspoken refuge, a place where the chaos of the outside world could not reach. That evening, the rain returned softly, brushing against the glass. Elena knelt beside a patch of blooming jasmine, trimming away dead leaves. Adrian entered quietly, holding 2 cups of tea. "You have not eaten," he said, setting 1 cup beside her. "I will," she replied. "The plants needed me more." He smiled faintly. "You talk about them like they are people. They are alive," she said. "They respond to care and to neglect, just like people do." He looked at her for a long moment. "And what about forgiveness? Do you think it works the same way?" She hesitated, her fingers brushing a delicate stem. "Forgiveness needs care too, but it takes longer to grow." He nodded, understanding the meaning behind her words. "Then I will wait," he said quietly. The next morning, Adrian's legal team delivered new evidence. It was a set of audio recordings, conversations between Veronica and one of her business associates. In them, she openly admitted to falsifying financial documents and planning to manipulate the media for leverage. When Adrian played the recordings for Elena, she covered her mouth in disbelief. "She said all of this herself?" "Yes," he said. "She was careless. One of her partners recorded the call as insurance. He handed it over once we proved her payments had bounced." Elena shook her head slowly. "She ruined everything she touched. My father's name, my family's reputation, and even her own." Adrian placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "She cannot hurt you anymore. By the time we present this in court, she will be finished." But Veronica Montero was not one to go quietly. That afternoon, a reporter leaked a story claiming that Adrian had manipulated the evidence. Headlines screamed accusations once again. Billionaire CEO framed his own mother-in-law. By evening, the mansion was surrounded by paparazzi. Flashbulbs lit the night like lightning, and questions echoed through the gates. "Mr. Blackwood, how do you respond to the forgery claims? Mrs. Blackwood, are you protecting your husband? Is the marriage itself another performance?" Adrian's security team ushered the reporters away, but the damage had been done. Inside, Elena paced the living room, her hands trembling. "She will never stop," she said, "even when the truth is right in front of her." Adrian crossed the room and stopped in front of her. "Then we will end this on our terms." He called Daniel, his assistant, and spoke with quiet precision. "Arrange an exclusive interview. Tomorrow night, I will speak directly to the public." Elena looked at him in disbelief. "You are going to face them again?" "Yes," he said firmly. "No more silence. If I let her control the story, we lose everything, including the truth." The next day, the interview was broadcast live. The studio lights were bright, the cameras relentless. Adrian and Elena sat side by side across from the host. "Mr. Blackwood," the interviewer began, "many people believe your marriage was a calculated move. Was it?" Adrian looked directly into the camera. "When I married Elena, it was a business arrangement. That much is true. But what began as obligation became something I did not expect, something real. My only mistake was doubting her when she needed me most. I will not make that mistake again." The interviewer turned to Elena. "And you, Mrs. Blackwood? What kept you in the marriage?" Elena's eyes glistened under the studio lights. "At first, it was duty. Then it became faith. I stayed because I believe that truth has a way of finding its way back, no matter how lost it gets." "WW." The host hesitated, then asked, "And what would you say to Veronica Montero if she were watching right now?" Elena took a slow breath. "I would say that she cannot build happiness out of someone else's pain, and I forgive her not because she deserves it, but because I refuse to let her define who I am anymore." The room fell silent. Even the host seemed momentarily speechless. That night, the clip spread across social media within hours. People who had once criticized them began to speak in their defense. Headlines shifted. "Elena Blackwood speaks with grace under fire. Public opinion turns against Montero." When they returned home, the tension that had weighed on them for months finally began to lift. Adrian stopped at the greenhouse door, looking at Elena under the soft glow of the lamps. "You handled that better than any executive I have ever seen," he said. She smiled faintly. "Maybe that is because I stopped trying to win. I just told the truth." He stepped closer, his voice low and sincere. "And you reminded me what truth looks like." For the first time in a long time, the mansion was quiet, but this time, it was not from fear. It was from peace, the kind that comes when two people finally realize that no lie, no storm, and no past could take away what they had built together. The following week became a turning point. The interview had changed everything. What once was doubt and gossip had shifted into empathy and support. Viewers across the country began to see Elena not as the woman at the center of a scandal, but as a symbol of grace under pressure. Reporters who had once chased her car now wrote about her strength. Social media flooded with messages defending her and condemning Veronica Montero's deceit. Yet in the quiet corners of the Blackwood mansion, Elena felt no victory, only relief. She had not wanted fame, only peace. Each morning, she still rose early, watered the greenhouse, and worked on the plans for her father's workshop revival. Adrian joined her when he could, but most days he was away managing the company's next steps after the storm. One evening, as the sun began to fade behind the city skyline, Adrian returned home earlier than expected. He found her sitting at the grand piano, playing softly. The same melody she had played the night they first began to understand each other filled the air. He stood silently in the doorway until the last note faded. "You still play that song," he said quietly. She looked up and smiled. "It reminds me where everything began." Adrian stepped closer, his tone gentler than usual. "I met with the foundation today. They approved funding for the workshop project. Construction will begin next month." Elena's eyes widened. "You are serious?" He nodded. "It will be exactly as your father imagined it. A place for apprentices to learn, to create, and to rebuild their lives. The board has already agreed to name it the Montero Restoration Center, in his honor, not hers." Her eyes filled with tears. "You did not have to do that." "I wanted to," he said softly. "It is time something good came from all of this." She stood, crossing the room to him. "You kept your promise." He smiled faintly. "You gave me a reason to." "Oh." For a long moment, they stood in silence, the distance between them replaced by something warmer, steadier. It was no longer just gratitude, it was trust rebuilt through hardship. The next day, they traveled to the construction site where the new workshop would stand. The old building had been cleared, leaving an open space surrounded by fields of grass. Workers moved about with quiet purpose, carrying beams and cement. Elena stepped out of the car, the wind lifting her hair. She closed her eyes and breathed in the scent of sawdust and fresh air. "It feels like him," she whispered. Adrian watched her quietly. "Then let us make sure it always does." They spent the day walking through the site, reviewing plans, and speaking with the architect. Elena's excitement grew with every detail. When she showed Adrian the blueprint her father had drawn years ago, He smiled. "It will look exactly like this," he said. "Only stronger." All by sunset, the workers had packed their tools, and the field grew quiet. The sky turned orange and gold, the air soft and cool. Elena stood at the edge of the site, looking out at the unfinished foundation. Adrian joined her. "Do you know what I realized today?" he asked. She turned toward him. "What is that?" "That this project is not just about your father," he said. "It is about you. Everything you touch, you bring back to life. The garden, the house, even me." Her cheeks flushed, and she looked down. "You are giving me too much credit again." "No," he said gently. "I am finally giving you the right amount." They stood side by side, watching the last light fade beyond the hills. For a moment, the world felt still. No cameras, no reporters, no accusations. Just them, and the promise of something better. That night, when they returned home, the mansion no longer felt like the cold place it once had been. The lamps cast a soft glow through the hallways, and the faint scent of jasmine drifted from the greenhouse. Elena paused by the doorway, turning to Adrian. "It feels different here," she said. He nodded. "Because it is no longer mine. It is ours." She smiled softly, but there was a hint of uncertainty in her voice. "Do you ever think about how strange it is? How something that began as a contract turned into this?" He met her gaze, his expression calm. "Every day, and I think it is the best mistake I have ever made." Her laugh was quiet, almost shy. "A mistake?" "A fated one," he said. For a long moment, they said nothing more. The air between them carried the unspoken truth of everything they had endured, the lies, the losses, and the long path toward understanding. As the night deepened, thunder rolled faintly in the distance. But this time, neither of them feared the coming rain. They had already weathered far worse. Elena turned off the last lamp in the hall and looked back at him. "Tomorrow, we start again," she said. He smiled. Together. Outside, the first drops of rain touched the windows, soft and steady. Inside, the mansion glowed with warmth. The ghosts of the past had faded, replaced by the quiet promise of a future built not on contracts or survival, but on something far stronger: choice. And for the first time, both of them understood that their story, born out of obligation, had finally become something real. The weeks that followed brought the calm they had both longed for. The chaos of the courtroom was over. The final hearing had ended with clear judgment in their favor. Veronica Montero was found guilty of fraud and slander, sentenced to restitution and a public apology. The media coverage that once painted Elena as a pawn now celebrated her as the woman who stood tall against corruption and cruelty. But for Elena, the greatest victory was not what the world saw, it was what she felt. The fear that had once lived inside her chest was gone. The pain of being doubted had faded, replaced by the steady certainty that she had survived. One morning, as the first sunlight crept through the curtains, she woke to the sound of quiet movement. Adrian was standing by the window, already dressed for work, reviewing a stack of documents. "You are leaving early," she said sleepily. He turned, his expression softening. "There is a meeting with the foundation committee. They want to finalize the schedule for the workshop's opening." She smiled. "You are actually excited about a community project. I think my father would have liked that." He chuckled quietly. "Maybe he and I would have gotten along better than we expected." "Oh." Before leaving, he paused by her side. "The ribbon-cutting ceremony is next week. I want you to speak. It was your father's dream. You should be the one to open it." Elena hesitated. "I do not know if I can. Public speaking still makes me nervous." "You faced an entire nation during an interview," he reminded her gently. "You can handle a few hundred people." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "We will see." When he left, the mansion felt strangely warm, alive with morning light. The air carried the faint scent of jasmine from the greenhouse. She walked through the hall, her fingers brushing the piano as she passed, and stopped in front of the portrait that now hung above the fireplace, a painting of her father's workshop, gifted by the foundation. In that moment, she realized something. Her father's legacy had never been about the building or the business. It was about kindness, resilience, and the courage to keep creating beauty even when the world tried to destroy it. And now, she was carrying that legacy forward. Over the following days, preparations for the grand opening consumed their time. Reporters sent invitations. Sponsors arrived with donations. Volunteers from the community helped clean and paint the workshop. Adrian oversaw logistics while Elena worked closely with the architects to make sure the design matched her father's blueprints exactly. On the eve of the ceremony, the site was finally ready. Wooden tables filled the main hall, each one engraved with her father's initials. Sunlight streamed through the new windows, reflecting off rows of polished tools. It was everything he had imagined and more. As the evening sky darkened, Adrian found Elena standing alone at the entrance, watching the workers lock up. The golden glow from inside illuminated her face. "Everything is ready," he said. "Are you?" She turned to him, her voice calm but full of emotion. "I think so. It feels like the end of one life and the start of another." He nodded. "That is exactly what it is." They walked along the river beside the workshop, the same river that had once run behind her childhood home. The air was cool, carrying the scent of cedar and earth. For a while, they said nothing, simply listening to the steady rhythm of water against stone. Finally, Adrian spoke. "Do you ever think about how much has changed since that day?" She smiled faintly. "The day my stepmother forced me to marry you," he laughed quietly. "Yes, that one." Elena looked out across the water. "Sometimes I still cannot believe it. I thought that day was the end of my freedom. I never imagined it would lead me here." He stopped walking and faced her. "I do not believe in fate, but I do believe in choices. Every time you could have run, you stayed. Every time I could have turned away, I came back. Maybe that is what love really is, choosing again and again, even when it hurts." She met his gaze, her heart steady. "Then I choose you," she said simply. The words hung in the air like a vow. Adrian reached for her hand, his voice quiet but full of certainty. "And I choose you. No contracts, no obligations, just us." The sound of the river filled the silence that followed. Above them, the stars began to appear bright, unwavering, endless. When they returned to the mansion later that night, the city lights shimmered in the distance. Inside, Mrs. Helen had left 2 glasses of wine on the piano, with a note that read, "For new beginnings." Elena smiled as she read it. "She always knows," she said. Adrian poured the wine and handed her a glass. "To your father's dream," he said. She raised hers gently. "To ours," she replied. They clinked glasses, and the soft sound echoed through the quiet room. For the first time since the day their lives collided, everything was still, not because there was nothing left to fight for, but because they had finally found peace. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, carrying the faint scent of rain. The world was still imperfect, but for Elena and Adrian, it finally felt right. The morning of the grand opening dawned bright and golden. The sun rose over the hills, casting a soft light across the valley where the new Montero Restoration Center stood. The building glimmered under the early rays, its glass panels reflecting the sky, its walls painted in warm earth tones that blended seamlessly with the landscape. It looked nothing like the cold skyscrapers of the city. It looked alive, as if the spirit of her father's workshop had been reborn. Elena stood by the entrance, her hands clasped together as volunteers and guests began to arrive. The courtyard was filled with the hum of conversation, the laughter of children, and the smell of fresh wood and paint. Banners fluttered gently in the breeze. Each one bore the same inscription, "Where second chances are built by hand." Adrian stood beside her, dressed in a simple dark suit. For once there was no press, no flash of cameras, only community members, workers, and students who had helped bring the project to life. "It is perfect," he said quietly. She smiled at him, her eyes soft. "It is home." They walked through the main hall together, greeting guests. The space was wide and filled with light. Rows of work tables lined the floor, each one fitted with handcrafted tools. On one wall hung a portrait of her father, smiling beside his original blueprint. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "Dedicated to those who create beauty out of brokenness." As Elena ran her fingers across the edge of one table, she whispered, "He would have loved this." Adrian looked at her with quiet pride. Then today, let us honor him the way he deserves. When the time came for the ceremony, the crowd gathered beneath the open canopy outside. The mayor gave a brief speech about resilience and generosity. Then Adrian stepped forward to introduce Elena. He spoke clearly, his voice steady. When this began, it was not about profit or recognition. It was about keeping a promise to a man who believed that integrity mattered more than wealth, and to a woman who proved that belief right. This project exists because she refused to let loss define her. It exists because she found courage in kindness. Please welcome the reason we are all standing here today, Elena Blackwood. Applause rose through the crowd as Elena walked to the podium. Her heart pounded, but her voice, when it came, was calm. "Thank you," she began. "Many of you know this place once belonged to my father. Years ago, when I was a child, I would sit beside him while he worked on furniture for families who could not afford new ones. He always said that creating something with your hands makes you remember the value of patience and the power of hope. When I lost him, I thought I lost everything. But standing here now, surrounded by all of you, I see that his dream did not end with him. It lives here, in every wall, every table, and every person who will walk through these doors." She paused, her eyes glistening as she looked at Adrian. "This project began because of a contract I never wanted, but it became something I will never forget. Life has a way of leading us where we least expect. Sometimes the road to freedom looks like a cage. Sometimes love looks like a challenge. And sometimes the hardest trials reveal the truest people." The audience was silent, listening closely. Elena continued, her voice soft but firm. "Today, we open these doors not just for the students who will learn here, but for everyone who has ever been told they are not enough. You are enough. You always were. And this place is proof that no lie, no betrayal, no loss can erase what is good and real." The applause that followed was long and heartfelt. Tears glistened in the eyes of more than a few guests. Adrian stepped beside her, handing her a small pair of gold scissors. Together, they cut the ribbon. The sound of clapping echoed through the courtyard as the doors swung open and sunlight poured inside. After the ceremony, visitors toured the center. Children tried sanding wood for the first time. Apprentices tested tools and compared techniques. Elena moved among them with quiet joy, her heart swelling as she watched the laughter and light fill the space. Later that afternoon, when the crowd began to leave, she slipped away to the back garden where a small wooden bench had been placed beneath a tree. She sat there, letting the breeze move through her hair, feeling both exhausted and whole. Adrian found her there, carrying 2 cups of lemonade. "I thought you might need this," he said, handing one to her. She smiled. "I did. Thank you." He sat beside her. "Do you realize what you have done today?" She looked toward the building, watching the reflection of the sun in its windows. "I think I finally finished something my father started." "No," Adrian said gently. "You started something new." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the rustle of leaves and the distant sound of children laughing inside the workshop. After a moment, Elena spoke again. "Do you remember the first time we met? I hated you." He laughed quietly. "I remember. You threw a glass of water at me." She smiled, shaking her head. "You deserved it." "I did," he admitted. "But I also remember what I saw that day, a woman who refused to let anyone decide her worth. That is the same woman sitting here now, only stronger." She looked at him, her voice soft. "And you are not the same man either." He tilted his head. "Better or worse?" "Better," she said without hesitation. "You stopped leading with pride. You started leading with heart." He smiled at her words, his eyes warm. "I had a good teacher." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of wood and jasmine. Elena closed her eyes, taking it in. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" He nodded. "Every day, but I am not afraid of it anymore." "Neither am I," she said quietly. The sun began to sink behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The light touched their faces as they sat side by side on the bench. After a long silence, Adrian reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Elena blinked, surprised. "What is that?" she asked. He opened it slowly. Inside was a simple gold ring, engraved with a single word, truth. "I never gave you a proper proposal," he said. Our beginning was built on obligation, but everything after that was real. So, Elena Blackwood, will you marry me again? Not because we have to, but because we choose to. Tears welled in her eyes as she covered her mouth. Adrian, he smiled gently. You once told me that forgiveness takes care. I am still learning, but I want to spend the rest of my life learning with you. Her voice trembled, but her answer was clear. Yes. 1,000 times yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and the world seemed to fall into perfect stillness. As evening descended, the lights of the workshop flickered to life, glowing like stars across the valley. The sound of hammers and laughter had faded, replaced by the peaceful rhythm of the river nearby. Elena leaned against Adrian's shoulder, her voice soft. Do you hear that? He listened. What? The sound of something beginning, she said. He smiled, wrapping his arm around her. Then let it begin. The camera of life might have zoomed out at that moment, two figures sitting on a wooden bench, surrounded by light, by the echo of second chances, by the quiet certainty that love, when built on truth, can turn even the most broken beginnings into something unshakably whole. And as the stars filled the sky above the Montero Restoration Center, it felt as if the world itself had exhaled content, complete, and at peace.